Hello readers by eyes and by ears, this is Marty Chan and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am so excited because now that we are officially finished with Xue Shan, we can focus all of our energy on the disabled tyrant's beloved pet fish, also known as 残疾暴君的掌心鱼宠 by Xue Shan Fei Hu. And you know what? Now that I feel like I can breathe a little bit more, I can even sometimes read a little bit more. So not saying that I'm going to be reading 2 hours or 2.5 hours worth of videos every day and posting them, but instead of sometimes doing 4 chapters, I may do 5 or 6. Today, we're actually covering chapters 29 through 33. Enjoy! Chapter 29, A Courageous, Ambitious Fish. An expressionless Ye Qinghuan set down a stack of secret reports in front of Prince Jing. Ye Shizhe was normally very lively, and it was rare for him to look so solemn. When he put the reports down, Liu Yu stopped swimming around his fish tank as well, afraid of missing a single piece of information. The emperor had Ye Qinghuan and his father, the Duke of Changle, stay behind after the banquet. Ye Qinghuan had acted guarded and restrained at the banquet, thinking he wouldn't stand out. But the emperor still chose him to marry the princess of Jinjue. Those unbelievable words on the letter were slowly becoming reality. The emperor did ask for Duke of Chang'an's opinion, but a marriage like this was a national affair, and Ye Qinghuan knew well that his father was loyal to the emperor and would not disagree. And thus, his marriage was decided upon. But it wasn't life after marriage Ye Qinghuan was worried about. The letter stated that the second prince would frame him for killing the princess of Jinjue. Clearly, she was also a victim. Ye Qinghuan was determined to thwart the second prince's plans. After the second prince was dealt with, it would be the princess's decision whether or not she wanted to go through with the marriage. He'd kept an eye on the second prince and the sixth prince ever since he received the letter. Since Ye Shizhe's marriage was established, there'd been many more people coming in and out of Mu Tianzhao's manor. The second prince was definitely plotting something. With Prince Jing occasionally reminding him to be skeptical, Ye Qinghuan also didn't completely believe what was written in the letter. The more its contents came true, the more cautious he needed to be. His people soon uncovered the second prince's plot. On the day Ye Qinghuan and the princess were to enter the palace and thank the emperor, the second prince planned to lure the princess of Jinjue to Yanyu Pavilion and kill her there. He would then lure Ye Qinghuan there too to take the blame. As long as Ye Qinghuan stepped into Yanyu Pavilion, he would find his fiancée's corpse with his own sword in her chest. The second prince planned to have someone steal it from Changle Manor beforehand so he could plant it as proof that Ye Shizhe had been the one to kill her. The stage thus set, the second prince would lead a group of imperial guards to Yanyu Pavilion and capture Ye Shizhe red-handed. In the face of such concrete evidence, there was nothing Ye Qinghuan could say to save himself. The second prince intended to frame Ye Qinghuan for sabotaging the marriage and killing the princess. It matched what most of the mysterious informant had written, but there were some parts of the letter that didn't match. For example, the letter had warned them that the sixth prince had some part in this as well and asked Ye Shizhe to not trust the sixth prince. Ye Qinghuan was only able to find out information about the second prince. The sixth prince hadn't made any moves. Compared to the second prince, who was used to putting on a mask around others, or the third prince, who jumped at any opportunity to compete with the second prince, the sixth prince was simply transparent. Even at an important event like the imperial banquet, he didn't even try to scoot closer to the emperor. Ye Qinghuan wondered if the letter had been written incorrectly. After all, there were so many incorrect characters. It was a miracle that he'd had the patience to finish reading it. But since the sixth prince hadn't done as the letter said he would, there was no way to tell who the sixth prince was going to harm. Prince Jing and Ye Qinghuan discussed it several times over, but in the end, they decided they should still have someone keep an eye on the sixth prince. They also found out that the second prince had secretly prepared arsenic. It was clear that he meant to poison someone, but it was unclear who. At the very least, it couldn't be the princess of Jinjue, because she had to die by Ye Shizhe's sword so he could be framed. Poisoning would only complicate matters. Ye Qinghuan made the necessary preparations on his end, and the imperial decree was issued shortly during the Dragon Boat Festival. Very soon, he would have to enter the palace to thank the emperor for his engagement. Prince Jing, meanwhile, had agreed to enter the palace with Ye Shizhe. On the day Ye Shizhe was due to thank the emperor, Prince Jing changed into a lighter outfit, put on a black guan, and casually threw on a royal blue outer robe made of cotton with a silver trim. Ordinary people weren't allowed to carry swords into the palace, but since Prince Jing was a prince, not only did he have a sword hanging from his waist, he also calmly shoved a dagger into his cloud-patterned boots, as if he was going to fight the second prince to the death. Li Yu swam around anxiously in his crystal fish tank. He wanted to go too. Since Prince Jing never got together with the little concubine, the house of Chang'an had no reason to help the third prince. He didn't know whether the second or sixth prince would still follow the plot in the book, and besides, what if there were details he missed when he last read it? He couldn't for the life of him remember the name of the imperial princess that the sixth prince killed in the book. It was only mentioned in a single sentence, so she couldn't even be considered cannon fodder. Thus, all he could do was remind Ye Qinghuan to keep an eye out for the sixth prince and trust that Ye Shizhe and Prince Jing would work together. If the sixth prince was to make a move, he was certain that they could stop it. All he wanted was to stay by Prince Jing and receive first-hand information to prevent the worst-case scenario. He assumed Prince Jing would take him, but the crystal bottle was never brought out. That meant he wouldn't be taken along. It would be impossible for him to enter the palace on his own if Prince Jing didn't take him. Li Yu flapped his tail and jumped into a tea bowl from the crystal fish tank. After a few consecutive jumps, he planned to jump onto the crystal bottle that was currently laying horizontally on the table. But since the bottle was smooth, the wet little carp slipped off the bottle before he could stabilize himself and almost landed on the table head first. Prince Jing, with his sharp eyes and quick reflexes, scooped him up and put him into the petal-shaped tea bowl nearby. Sob, sob, sob! Li Yu wailed internally. Has Prince Jing made up his mind about not taking me, since he's not putting me in the bottle? Li Yu jumped again. This time, he bravely leaped onto Prince Jing's shoulder and used his fins to grab tightly onto his clothing. He felt like he'd turned into a majestic eagle, shielding his master from the wind and rain from his position on his shoulder. In reality, his wet fins soon made Prince Jing's shoulder damp. Li Yu started thumping on Prince Jing's shoulder. That's not what I wanted to do. Prince Jing wiped away the water on his face and picked his fish up. Li Yu knew Prince Jing wasn't happy. He'd been the prince's fish for so long, and he rarely lifted Li Yu by his head. He would only do this when something was wrong. Was his master angry? Knowing he'd made a mistake, the little carp tried to sweetly wrap around Prince Jing's finger. But since he was held up by his head, his tail couldn't reach that far and only rubbed against Prince Jing's palm instead. Prince Jing thought the little fish just wanted to come out and play. Perhaps since he'd taken Li Yu everywhere with him lately, the fish assumed that he could play every day. But not tonight. It was very likely he and Ye Qinghuan might have to fight against the second prince. Never mind whether or not it was convenient, the fish would probably be uncomfortable. Prince Jing was originally planning to leave him with Wang Xi, but his fish even jumped onto his shoulder after failing to get into the crystal bottle. It seemed like he was spoiled too much and had become too bold. Prince Jing silently criticized the fish, but now that he thought about it, if he left his fish in the residence, he might become victim to the thief again. Either way, going to the palace would result in getting his people in the palace involved, and he would definitely go to Jingtai Hall. Why didn't he just take the fish to Jingtai Hall for a few hours and ask Wang Xi to come along? Prince Jing let out a sigh of resignation as he placed the fish carefully into the crystal bottle, then changed his outer robes. Li Yu was thrilled. He was getting to enter the palace even though he had done something wrong. My plan worked! Prince Jing brought his fish along and met Ye Qinghuan at the palace gate. Just as Prince Jing was holding on to the crystal bottle, Ye Qinghuan was holding Xiong Feng's leash. Ye Qinghuan smiled. I knew you'd bring your fish. I brought Xiong Feng too, so they can keep each other company while we're attending to business. No way! Li Yu was floored. He had business to attend to as well. He wasn't here to keep a dog company. No sooner than Ye Qinghuan had finished speaking, Xiongfeng excitedly reached his head over and poked the crystal bottle with his nose. The crystal bottle was larger than the tea bowls, but it still felt like Xiongfeng could hold the entire thing in his mouth if he opened it wide enough. The crystal bottle was narrow and thin, so when Xiongfeng licked the bottle, Li Yu felt like the dog's teeth were suddenly much closer to him too. Even though he was already familiar with Xiongfeng, it still made Li Yu a little nervous. Prince Ting handed Wang Xi the crystal bottle. Wang Xi had already brought over the white and blue porcelain fish tank they used at Jingtai Hall before, and he put the little fish inside it. Li Yu breathed a sigh of relief, finally feeling safe. Before the day they entered the palace, Prince Ting and Ye Qinghuan had agreed to put the princess of Jinjue's safety first, in case the second prince really did end up harming her. But since neither of them were close with her, it would be inconvenient to send someone directly to her. Inspired by the letter Ye Qinghuan received, Prince Ting decided to write an anonymous letter to the princess of Jinjue stating that someone was plotting against her. Prince Ting had come up with the idea, and Ye Qinghuan was the one who delivered it. Since Ye Shurzi oversaw the king and princess of Jinjue's safety, nobody would suspect a thing if he delivered them a letter. It was rumored that the king of Jinjue was furious when he received the letter and had summoned his trusted advisors to examine it for an entire night to try to determine the intent of the writer. For the safety of his daughter, the king ordered high-ranking guards to accompany her everywhere at all times, even when she entered the palace to give thanks to the emperor. The emperor didn't know his reasons. He just thought the king was being too protective since the palace was quite safe. But it was a trivial matter, and he didn't want to limit the king of Jinjue over this. So, the princess of Jinjue was surrounded by 16 high-ranking guards at every turn, and those were only the visible ones. There were probably many more hidden around her. The second prince's plan would not succeed as long as the princess was safe. A few days ago, the second prince's people had snuck into Chang'an Manor under Ye Qinghuan's secret watchful eye. To give the second prince a nice present, Ye Qinghuan had picked a very special sword and let them steal it so the second prince would think everything was going according to plan. After settling their pets down, Prince Ting and Ye Qinghuan started to wait. Soon, an aide came to report that a stranger of unknown origin had tried to get close to the princess of Jinjue, but a guard spotted the person and beat him up quite badly. Prince Ting and Ye Qinghuan exchanged a look. They both guessed that the second prince must have sent that person to lure the princess of Jinjue over. "We should go," Ye Qinghuan said softly. It was time to head to Yanyu Pavilion and say hello to the second prince. Prince Ting nodded at Wang Xi, patted the little carp on the head, and headed into the night with Ye Qinghuan and his men. Li Yu watched Prince Ting leave. He stopped in his fish tank, quietly analyzing the situation. Why hadn't the sixth prince made a move yet? Most likely because Prince Ting wasn't with Chu Yanyu yet, and the third and sixth princes had not yet won the support of the House of Chang'an. There was no need for them to take a risk now. The current situation was just the second prince's one-man show, but Li Yu didn't really understand why the second prince persisted with this plan even though the sixth prince had already retreated. Perhaps narrow-minded and short-sighted people always made the same decisions. The only thing Li Yu could do now was wait for information in Jingtai Hall. Just then, he heard a light click. Xiongfeng, who seemed to be sleeping near the fish tank, raised his head, alert. It wasn't Wang Xi. Li Yu was familiar with Wang Xi's footsteps, and the sound had come from the window. Wang Xi was in Jingtai Hall, and he definitely wouldn't climb through the window. Illuminated by the soft glow of a candle, a black shadow sprang into the room through the window. Who was it? Li Yu immediately thought of the female assassin who tried to kill Prince Ting, and his fish body started to tremble. Xiongfeng, as expected of a dog who wanted to protect his fish friend, immediately started barking wildly. The black figure loitered in front of the table for a bit and was just about to walk over when Xiongfeng leapt toward the person and bit him on the hand, causing him immense pain. "What's happening?" Wang Xi's voice rang out, and the surrounding guards were alerted as well. As the situation put him at a disadvantage, the black figure left the same way he came, holding his injured hand all the way. Wang Xi was very frustrated that he hadn't caught the man, but thankfully both fish and dog were fine. Wang Xi, relieved, brought a box of fish food from the table to feed Master Fish and Master Dog. Xiong Feng's tail wagged happily. Wang Xi put the fish food onto a jade plate, and Xiong Feng was just about to eat some when something occurred to Li Yu. He thought of how the black figure had rummaged around on the table for a bit, and a peculiar feeling rose in his chest. Li Yu immediately flapped his tail and whacked a blue stone, one of the ones he used to play with, toward the jade plate. Since he used excessive force, the stone knocked the plate over, and the fish food ended up on the ground. Wang Xi was surprised. The little carp rarely lost his temper like this. "Master Fish, what's wrong?" Wang Xi's gaze landed on the fallen fish food, and he suddenly seemed to think of something. Could it be that... Wang Xi quickly took out a silver needle from the inside of his robes. Nobody would think to test for poison in pet food. Wang Xi hoped he was just overthinking, but he feared the worst. The silver needle poked into the fish food, and when he pulled it out a short while later, the tip was already black. Li Yu's heart skipped a beat. The fish food was really poisoned? Sob, sob, sob! I was almost poisoned! How scary! Since he was basically the only one who ate that food, Li Yu was certain that someone wanted to harm him. Soon enough, Wang Xi reached the same conclusion. With Prince Ding away, Wang Gonggong took charge and ordered someone to put Master Fish and Xiong Feng in a room without windows. He personally took up watch outside the room, determined to not let anyone slip by again. Chapter 30. Fishy First Aid. As for Ye Qinghuan, he had also met the person the second prince had sent to lure him into Yanyu Pavilion. Prince Ding glanced at him meaningfully, and Ye Qinghuan followed the person, pretending to be clueless. Prince Ding followed with his aides at some distance so that the second prince's agents wouldn't notice. When they arrived at Yanyu Pavilion, they really did see a woman on the ground, pierced through by Ye Qinghuan's sword. And the second prince soon arrived on the scene with the imperial guards he'd prepared beforehand. The second prince glanced at the corpse on the ground, who was dressed in Jinjue apparel. Mu Tianzhao, who was secretly pleased, acted surprised and said, "Yeshitsu, why are you here? What have you done to the princess?" Just as Ye Qinghuan opened his mouth to answer, the emperor's bright yellow dragon robe swept into the Yanyu Pavilion. This was, of course, part of the second prince's plan. He'd privately told the emperor that he heard Yeshitsu and the princess of Jinjue were meeting secretly in the Yanyu Pavilion. Though he had ordered the marriage, the emperor still thought the meeting was inappropriate, so he headed over to scold them a bit. He didn't expect to walk into a murder scene. What in the world is going on? The emperor's questioning gaze moved from the woman on the ground to Ye Qinghuan. "Your Imperial Majesty, I just arrived as well," Ye Qinghuan replied calmly. "I was just trying to figure out what had happened when the second prince appeared." Mu Tianzhao thought his tone was a little strange, but he was certain there weren't flaws in his plan. He gathered all his anger in his chest and shot back. "Anyone with eyes can see what happened. Yeshitsu, you're the one who killed the princess, yet you want to deny it?" He raised his hand and pointed at the sword in the woman's chest. "This is Yeshitsu's sword, is it not?" The emperor realized how grave the situation currently was. Was it true that the princess of Jinjue was dead, and that Ye Qinghuan had killed her? With a single order, the imperial guards rushed forward to investigate. Everything the second prince had said seemed to make sense, but when the imperial guards flipped over the body, they realized that it wasn't the princess of Jinjue. It was a woman dressed in Jinjue's servant attire. The emperor's sharp gaze swept over the scene. The imperial guards stepped aside, not daring to say a word. The sword was also removed from the woman's chest and brought to the emperor. The emperor was the one who'd given Ye Qinghuan his sword, so he had a good memory of it. This sword was extremely similar to Ye Qinghuan's, so much so that at first glance the emperor thought it was his. "Ye Qinghuan, is this not your sword? And you have no sword on you right now." The second prince was confident, and his words were forceful. "Your Imperial Majesty, the second prince seems to have forgotten the rules of the palace," said Ye Qinghuan, his voice low. As subjects like myself are not allowed to carry a sword in front of the emperor, I gave my sword to the guards at the palace gate for safekeeping." The emperor nodded. Since Ye Qinghuan brought it up himself, the emperor immediately ordered someone to fetch the sword in question. Soon, a guard came over with Ye Qinghuan's sword. Why were there suddenly two swords? The second prince started to lose his cool. Ye Qinghuan solemnly asked the emperor to examine the swords. The emperor carefully compared the two swords in front of him. Truthfully, the swords were nearly identical when viewed separately, but their differences were obvious when they were side by side. The sword the guards brought to him was shiny and silver, but the one taken from the woman was as dark as iron. It was just an ordinary sword. It was clear which one was the real one. Meanwhile, the experienced imperial guards had come to the conclusion that this woman had been dead for several days already. Since she hadn't been killed just now, and the sword found in her wasn't even Ye Qinghuan's, there was nothing to support the claim that Ye Qinghuan was the murderer. But why were the two swords so similar? The emperor immediately deduced that someone had made the murder weapon almost identical to Ye Shizu's sword so they could frame him. He recalled the second prince's earlier claims. "This is Ye Shizu's sword. Ye Shizu killed the princess." But both were wrong. The sword was not Ye Shizu's, and the princess was not killed. The emperor himself had experienced many palace conflicts before. Now, even the way he looked at the second prince had changed. "Tianzhao," he said lightly. "You hadn't even confirmed that this woman was the princess of Jinjue when you arrived at Yanyu Pavilion. So why did you insist that Ye Shizu had killed the princess?" Mu Tianzhao was still in shock. Why was the emperor suddenly doubting him? He was just questioning Ye Qinghuan a moment ago. The one who was supposed to die at Yanyu Pavilion was the princess. He'd arranged this long ago. Was there someone else? But right now, the emperor was waiting for an explanation. Mu Tianzhao replied with great difficulty. "I saw that the deceased woman was dressed in Jinjue attire, so I thought she was the princess." The emperor gave him an unreadable glance and ordered the imperial guards to carry the corpse to the second prince. Only then did Mu Tianzhao realize that it wasn't the princess of Jinjue he knew, but... Ye Qinghuan smiled. "This woman is dressed in Jinjue attire, but a servant's outfit is very different from what the princess wears. What good eyesight you have, second prince, to mistake a servant for the princess with a single glance." Mu Tianzhao kept his mouth shut. Ye Shizu's ridicule was obvious. There was no way the emperor didn't know what the second prince was trying to do. Why else would he have tried so hard to get Ye Shizu to come to Yanyu Pavilion? Not only did the second prince fail to frame Ye Shizu, but he was the one caught red-handed instead. The emperor was both angry and resentful toward the second prince, so much so he wanted to kick him, but he still had to restrain himself. Since Ye Shizu and the princess were both fine, there was no need to take things any further. King Jinjue was still in the imperial city. He couldn't let the king know that the second prince had tried to harm his daughter. "Tianzhao, you can't even tell people apart from each other," he said. "For the next few days, you should stay in your residence and reflect on your actions. You may not leave without our permission." The emperor had never spoken so strictly to the second prince before. He was simply put under house arrest. There was no other punishment. Ye Qinghuan knew that the emperor would most likely let the second prince get away with it. If he had fallen for the second prince's trap, it was certain his punishment would have been death. Now it was clear the second prince was the one trying to frame Ye Shizu, though, and the emperor refused to do anything to his son. But they had plenty of time. The second prince's attempt to uproot the house of Changle had failed. So, when the house of Changle started treating him as an enemy, he'd have no one but himself to blame. There were many ways to ruin a person. Ye Qinghuan was upright and honest, but that didn't mean he didn't know how to retaliate. If someone hit him, he'd hit back. It was only right. He and Prince Ting had crafted the plan carried out today. They had used the body of an unknown female corpse from the dungeon to make the second prince think he had succeeded, so he'd let his guard down. The emperor comforted Ye Qinghuan personally, and Ye Qinghuan didn't press the matter with the second prince any further. Internally, the emperor sighed. He'd already felt something was off with the second prince at the imperial banquet the other day. But he hadn't thought it was this bad. The second prince had come so close to landing himself in disaster. He normally seemed perfectly capable. Why had a marriage arrangement made him so impulsive? Did he have to destroy everything he couldn't have? The emperor didn't understand the second prince's frustration, but he was quite put off by the ruthlessness in which the second prince had plotted to ruin the house of Changan. Shortly after the emperor had finished speaking with Ye Qinghuan, Prince Jing slowly walked in. Seeing his other son, the emperor smiled wearily. Tianchi, you're here as well? Mu Tianchi came over and bowed to the emperor. Then, unexpectedly, he silently took out a memorial tablet from his robes. The emperor's first reaction was to wonder why on earth Prince Jing would suddenly take out something like this, and he was a bit displeased. But after he read the words on the tablet, the emperor swallowed all his scolding. Because this was the memorial tablet of his first wife, Prince Jing's mother, Empress Xiaohui. The emperor's original desire to smooth the situation over was shattered into pieces by the sight of this tablet. He suddenly remembered whose family the house of Changan was. They were Empress Xiaohui's maternal family and relatives. If the empress was still alive, would he let the second prince get away with it so easily? Prince Jing was asking for justice on behalf of Empress Xiaohui and the house of Changan. Ye Qinghuan wasn't able to ask for it, but Prince Jing could. Tianchi, I understand what you mean. The emperor rubbed the spot between his brows. You and Ye Qinghuan may go, for now. Let me give it some thought. Ye Qinghuan dragged Prince Jing out of Yanyu Pavilion. What a stroke of genius from Prince Jing. He hadn't expected something like that. How bold! Ye Qinghuan laughed quietly, but he felt elated. Some people thought the previous empress's maternal family had nobody to rely on, but Prince Jing was still protecting the house of Changan. Well, the house of Changan would return the favor for Empress Xiaohui as well as on their own behalf. Prince Jing showed a rare little smile in front of his cousin. When Ye Qinghuan had headed to the Yanyu Pavilion, Prince Jing had followed at first, but he decided to take a risk and made a detour at Changchun Palace to retrieve his mother's tablet. It had ended up being quite useful. In his opinion, if they were going to strike against the second prince, it was better to strike hard and fast, so he wouldn't have a chance to get up again. Ye Qinghuan believed the same thing. Someone ended up leaking the news to King Jinjue, who was furious that the second prince had plotted to harm his daughter. The emperor immediately summoned Ye Qinghuan, the future son-in-law, to deal with King Jinjue's wrath. Ye Qinghuan had been planning to return to Jingtai Hall with Prince Jing to reunite with Xiongfeng, but now he had no choice but to stay behind. Prince Jing had no such obligation and set off for Jingtai Hall. He was halfway there when a black shadow suddenly jumped toward him and, seemingly without notice, bumped into him. Who? Prince Jing frowned and looked the person up and down. The figure was masked, so he couldn't see his face. Prince Jing suspected this person might have been sent by the second prince for revenge, so his hand was already on the scabbard of his sword. The person, startled, realized it was Prince Jing and brandished his own sword, lunging toward him. Their blades clashed. The masked man and Prince Jing were matched in skill, but it seemed as if his sword hand was injured. His movements were always a beat too slow. It didn't take long for Prince Jing to knock the sword out of his hand, but the man took advantage of how unprepared he was to hurl a bag of white powder at his face. Suddenly, unable to see, Prince Jing dropped his sword, but he could sense that the man was coming closer. He sneered, calmly took out the dagger hidden in his boot, and stabbed him. In less than a quarter of an hour, the fight was over. The masked man, heavily injured, made his escape. Prince Jing was a little unsteady on his feet, and he couldn't make a sound, but he knew he must be close to Jingtai Hall. Li Yu and Xiongfeng had been staring at each other all night. Of course, Xiongfeng had also occupied himself with gnawing on things, wagging his tail and poking the fish tank with his nose. Li Yu was about to fall asleep when Prince Jing finally appeared. Wang Xi, who was guarding the door, was overjoyed. "You're finally back, Your Highness! Did everything go well?" Prince Jing waved his hand. Wang Xi noticed that there was something wrong. His eyes were red and there was powder on his face. Wang Xi tried again and again to ask what had happened, but Prince Jing's eyes still hurt, and he couldn't write anything. He kept waving his hands around, rather irritably. It was clear that Prince Ting wasn't well. "This servant will help you into your room first and then summon an imperial physician for you," Wang Xi assured him. Since Master Fish was here and His Highness usually loved Master Fish the most, Wang Xi thought that His Highness might feel better if he stayed with the fish for a bit. So he helped Prince Ting to the room where the fish and the dog were currently waiting. As soon as Prince Ting entered the room, Xiongfang rushed over, wagging his tail and asking for praise. But Prince Ting couldn't see anything, so he accidentally stepped on Xiongfang's tail, and Xiongfang let out a couple of aggrieved barks. "Quiet down, Xiongfang. He doesn't seem well." Li Yu started swimming anxiously in his tank. He was so happy that Prince Ting was back that he didn't want to sleep anymore, but Prince Ting seemed to be in bad shape. Where was Wang Xi? Li Yu didn't know that Wang Xi was off summoning the imperial physician. There was light in the room, but everything was still blurry for Prince Ting. He fumbled around and sat down. His eyes were still uncomfortable, so he wanted to find a handkerchief to wipe them with. Li Yu glimpsed Prince Ting's red, swollen eyes and the residual white powder. A thought crossed his mind. Did someone throw lime powder at Prince Ting? He watched as Prince Ting took a towel from the edge of the wash basin and started to dip it in water. Li Yu hurriedly said, "No, you can't use water." If lime juice was washed with water, he could go blind. It was well known in modern times. But nobody could hear him, and the little carp swam anxiously up and down in his tank, hoping Prince Ting would see him and stop. However, Prince Ting was busy with his own problems and didn't notice. He wrung out the towel and was about to put it over his eyes. Li Yu wanted Xiongfang to do something, but Xiongfang, a stupid doggo, was only reliable sometimes. Right now, he was staring at Prince Ting with his head cocked. He probably thought Prince Ting's stumbling movements were interesting. What should he do? Prince Ting was going to go blind. He was already mute, so he couldn't go blind too, right? It would be too devastating. Li Yu stopped for a moment. He knew there was still another way to stop Prince Ting. Even if it was dangerous for him, he had to try it. The little carp gathered his strength and jumped out of the fish tank. He didn't mind that there were no tea bowls around and that it might hurt when he landed on the ground. Prince Ting's back was turned toward him, so Li Yu immediately used his transformation skill and turned into a human. I knew it! Sorry. It didn't matter how he was going to explain this. He had to stop Prince Ting. "Don't use water," Li Yu yelled. Prince Ting's hands stopped halfway to his face, and he turned around instinctively. This voice, he recognized it. This was the voice of the young man he'd been searching for all this time. Why did he suddenly appear in his room? Prince Ting was about to turn around, but Li Yu said, "Don't turn around right now. Please wait." Having just transformed, Li Yu was still naked. He looked around frantically, but the remarkable thing was, the windowless room Wang Xi had chosen was one with no wardrobe and no clothes. Li Yu couldn't be any more embarrassed, but he couldn't just run around like this. Although there was no wardrobe in this room, there were curtains hanging from the beams. There was no time. It'd have to do. Disregarding color or texture, Li Yu grabbed a random piece and wrapped it around himself. He didn't stop until he looked like a tube. Prince Ting stood stiffly, not daring to make any sudden movements. He could hear the activity behind him, so the youth hadn't left yet. But it felt like if he turned around, he might just disappear into thin air again. Right now, his eyes weren't in a good state. He had to remain calm and not scare him away. Prince Ting thought silently. Li Yu adjusted his curtain roll, then finally said, "Now you can." Prince Ting quickly turned around, but all he could see was a blurry tube. Li Yu stood before him and explained quietly, Your Highness, you cannot wash your eyes no matter what. Let me help you, okay?" Chapter 31, Fishy Exposed. Afraid that Prince Ting wouldn't believe him, Li Yu put his hands up so the prince could see them. "Your Highness, don't worry. I mean you no harm. Your eyes are uncomfortable, right? You should take care of them quickly." Prince Ting was a little hesitant. It was the first time he'd spoken to him, but for some reason, the young man seemed familiar somehow. Although he thought the young man was a thief at first, that assumption had faded over time, and the young man clearly didn't have any intention to harm him. If he was indeed the one who wrote and delivered the letter to Ye Qinghuan, then he had even helped them. But why did he take away Xiao Yu the first time they met? Prince Ting automatically tried to look for his fish, and Li Yu was startled. He did have that pillow that was shaped just like him before, but it had disappeared, and he hadn't bothered looking for it, so now there was nothing in the fish tank. Would he be exposed? He looked at the fish tank too, worried, but Xiongfeng just so happened to be standing in front of it, and he was large enough to completely obstruct the tank. Phew! Saved! Between the dog in the way and the discomfort in his eyes, Prince Ting probably only saw a swath of black. He realized he wouldn't be able to see his fish, so he turned back around. Li Yu let out a sigh of relief, but Prince Ting still didn't move. Li Yu was afraid that Prince Ting still didn't trust him, so he latched onto his arm in desperation. Please believe me. I'm not a bad person. I just want to help you get the powder out of your eyes. When he was a fish, he often jumped into Prince Ting's palms, so he was used to touching him. At that moment, he still thought of Prince Ting as his tyrant owner, so he didn't think it was strange to hug his arm. He was more afraid that Prince Ting would think he was a bad person and kill him. Li Yu's fishiness activated, and he hugged him even tighter. Prince Ting was shocked. He'd never met someone with this little propriety. He couldn't push him away, even though he was a bit uncomfortable. Let me try, please, Li Yu insisted. If it doesn't work, you can do with me what you see fit. Either way, Prince Ting was sure this strange young man wouldn't be able to try anything funny when he was right in front of him like this, so he might as well give him a chance. He fumbled for the table and sat down. Li Yu wiped his hands clean carefully and found a dry handkerchief. Once he made sure there was no water on it, he sat down next to Prince Ting and carefully pried open his eyelids, cleaning away the powder that had gotten into his eyes bit by bit. Luckily, there wasn't that much. Li Yu worked quickly, and in no time at all, he'd removed it all. He could tell now that it was definitely lime powder. Li Yu had learned in the real world that lime powder released a lot of heat when it melted, so if someone tried to wash it out of their eyes with water, it would burn them. He turned into a human just in time to stop Prince Ting. The results would have been catastrophic otherwise. Li Yu blew gently into Prince Ting's eyes, in case there were pieces he'd missed. Prince Ting was much more relaxed now and could see the stranger in front of him clearly. He was so close that he could see the young man's lowered eyelashes, his slightly sweaty nose, and his rosy pink lips pursed in concentration. He felt his warm breath too and realized that he was blowing into his eyes for him. Prince Ting looked away, thinking it was inappropriate, and caught a glimpse of the young man's bare feet and the water droplets gleaming on his toes. Prince Ting was becoming more and more intrigued by this youth by the minute. His curiosity was growing like a rolling snowball. Meanwhile, after Li Yu had made absolutely sure multiple times that there was no lime powder left in Prince Ting's eyes, he wanted to wash them out with water. He recalled that there was a wash basin in the room, and the water the servants prepared had usually been boiled then cooled, so it was safe to use. He got up to bring the wash basin over, but Prince Ting thought he was going to escape, so he grabbed his arm tightly as soon as he stood up. Li Yu instantly understood the prince's intentions. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "I'm just going to get some water," he said. "The powder's been removed, so your eyes can be washed now." But Prince Ting still refused to let go, even after Li Yu's explanation. The prince, whose eyes were almost back to normal, got up alongside Li Yu, still holding on to him, and they walked over to the wash basin together. When Prince Ting stood up straight, Li Yu only came up to his shoulders. Li Yu was wondering how he was going to get Prince Ting back into his seat when the prince lowered his head, staring at Li Yu with dark eyes. That meant he could wash his eyes, right? Li Yu had finally experienced Prince Ting's stubbornness firsthand. In this awkward position, he didn't use a wet towel to wipe his eyes, and instead scooped up some water, poured it into Prince Ting's eyes, and rinsed them out. After a couple of rinses, Prince Ting's eyes were still red and swollen, but he no longer felt any discomfort. Just to be safe, Li Yu said, "Your Highness, please have the imperial physician take a look later. You may still need medicine." Prince Ting nodded. They stared at each other for a moment, and it finally sunk in for Li Yu that he'd completely exposed his human form to Prince Jing. There was nothing inherently wrong with that. It wasn't the first time he'd done it, after all, but Prince Ting was still holding on to him. He made a couple of attempts to pull his hand away, but he couldn't do it. He could only maintain his human form for an hour, so what would happen if he suddenly transformed into a fish? He had to think of a way to either make Prince Ting go away or make himself go away. As soon as Prince Ting's eyes recovered, Prince Ting didn't take them off the young man in front of him, whether he was looking at his face or his attire. This time, the young man's pale arms were exposed, and he was wrapped in strange cloth. It only just came down to his knees, so his calves were bare, and the movements of his delicate ankles were exposed. Prince Ting couldn't help but wonder why this young man always dressed so peculiarly. Prince Ting dipped his finger into the wash basin and wrote on the table, "Who are you?" He had a lot of questions, but this was the first and easiest one to ask. Li Yu shook his head, pretending he couldn't read. It wasn't that he didn't want to tell him, but he didn't exist in the book. He'd be in a lot of trouble if he lied about his identity and ended up needing to back up that lie in the future. So it was better to not say anything in the first place. Maybe, Li Yu thought, if I just don't say anything, Prince Ting will become impatient and leave? He was very worried that the timer on the transformation skill would sneak up on him. That would be disastrous. Li Yu was quite a mess internally, but he still had to pretend to be calm. Prince Ting, seeing that Li Yu didn't answer, kept writing questions. "Why are you here? Why did you save me?" But Li Yu suppressed the urge to talk to Prince Ting and continued to shake his head. Prince Ting frowned. He'd asked so many questions, but the young man didn't answer any of them. Perhaps he couldn't read? Thinking back on it, recalling the letter Ye Qinghuan received, the handwriting was terrible, and Prince Ting had wondered how there could be such horrible handwriting in the world. Was it because he couldn't read, so he couldn't write either? Prince Ting glanced at Xiongfeng. Xiongfeng didn't react much to the young man's appearance, so he was probably familiar with him. That was how he'd been able to use Xiongfeng to deliver the letter. Prince Ting was comparing and analyzing the situation in his head. His questioning gaze made Li Yu's scalp go numb. Just as he thought he wasn't going to be able to keep pretending anymore and was thinking of outright running away, Wang Xi Gonggong, who'd left to summon the imperial physician, banged on the door. Your Highness, the imperial physician is here." The heavens always provided a way out. Hearing Wang Xi's shouting, Li Yu's eyes lit up. Prince Ting caught Li Yu's suddenly relaxed expression and immediately thought he was going to run away. Prince Ting smiled. At this point, how could he let him escape again? The imperial physician was right outside, but he didn't dare enter without Prince Ting's permission. Wang Xi walked inside to ask for further directions, only to see Prince Ting sitting casually in a chair with a strange young man wrapped in a tube-shaped cloth. Since Li Yu was dressed so freely, Wang Gonggong was so startled that he thought the tube was a blanket and almost didn't recognize him at first. He was screaming internally. He only went to summon the imperial physician, so why was some little minx trying to seduce His Highness again? But His Highness's expression didn't seem very angry. Not only was Prince Ting not angry, but he seemed to be in a strangely good mood for someone who was just plotted against. Wang Gonggong, who always made Prince Ting his top priority, thought things over quickly. Actually, as long as His Highness was happy, it was fine to have a little minx in here. He shouldn't ask too many questions. Wang Xi pretended not to see Li Yu and said respectfully to Prince Ting, "The imperial physician is waiting outside right now. Would you like him to come in, Your Highness?" Prince Ting didn't nod, but he stood up and straightened his clothes in preparation to go outside. Wang Xi followed quickly to take care of him. Before Prince Ting went out, he took a look at Li Yu. Li Yu didn't understand at first. He let out a sigh of relief, thinking he was free and could turn back into a fish. He was still a little worried, though, and he walked to the entrance and looked through the crack in the door. The door wasn't closed all the way, so he could see that Wang Xi had set up a seat just a step away from the door. Prince Ting was seated squarely in place as the imperial physician leaned over him, checking his pulse and his eyes. Ugh! This guy was such an asshole! Li Yu turned into a human to save him, not to let him trap him in the room. He'd taken a look at the room earlier, and he knew there were no windows and only one door. It should have been the safest place, but it turned into an inescapable prison. Li Yu turned to Xiongfeng, blubbering. Good boy, Xiongfeng. You're the only one who can help me now. Xiongfeng was completely removed from the situation and had no idea what his problem was. After checking Prince Ting's pulse and eyes, the imperial physician praised. Thankfully, your highness did well to take care of the situation. Your eyes are fine now, but I will prescribe medicine later to improve your eyesight and detoxify your eyes. Your highness will be completely fine after using it. Prince Ting smiled slightly. He thought the young man had handled it well, too. Prince Ting ordered Wang Xi to reward the imperial physician. After the physician left, Prince Ting wanted to return to the room, but Wang Xi thought he was just in a hurry to return to the little minx inside, so he stopped him. Your highness, after you left today, someone broke into Jingtai Hall to poison the food. Wang Xi recounted the events in detail, including how the intruder broke into Jingtai Hall, how Xiongfeng bit his hand, how the fish food was poisoned, and how Master Fish knocked over the jade plate, saving both himself and the dog. Wang Xi wanted to let Prince Ting know what had happened, but he also wanted to use this opportunity to remind Prince Ting to be on his guard, since that little minx's origins were unknown. But perhaps it would have been better if he hadn't told him. As Wang Xi explained, Prince Ting's face turned as cold as frost. He was even more furious than when people had plotted against him. When Wang Xi mentioned that the silver needle had turned black, Prince Ting thought back to the arsenic that the second prince had been secretly keeping in his residence. Framing the house of Chang'an wasn't enough for him. He even tried to go after his fish? Sooner or later, he'd make sure the second prince got what was coming to him. Prince Ting remembered the masked assailant who had attacked him as he was returning to Jingtai Hall. That man's hand had been injured too. Was it perhaps the same person that Xiongfeng bit? It was probably one of Mu Tianzhao's lackeys. He still hadn't laid eyes on Xiao Yu since he got back, for a multitude of reasons. Xiao Yu and the young man should still be in the room. Ever since the young man helped him wipe his eyes, he had the instinctive feeling that he would not harm the fish. Wang Xi kept calling out, Your Highness! But Prince Ting gestured at him to wait and walked into the room on his own. Before he opened the door, he had a strange, indescribable feeling, even though he knew it was impossible for the young man to escape this time. But he didn't give it any more thought. He confidently opened the door and saw the room was empty, cloth strewn around the floor, and the young man who was supposed to be waiting for him had disappeared again. That's not right. Prince Ting's temples throbbed. He had left the room, yes, but he'd been guarding the door the entire time. There were no windows in the room, so where could he have gone? This had happened several times now. Prince Ting decided it was necessary to change his line of thinking, no matter how absurd. The strange young man couldn't escape, so logically he still had to be in here, but most likely somewhere he hadn't thought of yet. Prince Ting walked over to the cloth on the ground and thought back to all that had happened when he met the young man, and he abruptly realized some alarming details. When the young man had appeared to help him, he didn't hear the door open, which meant the young man hadn't entered through the door. Did that mean the young man had already been in the room and he just didn't realize it? Just as he couldn't find him now? The room hadn't been completely silent at the time, though. Prince Ting had excellent hearing, and what he'd heard then was the flapping of a fish's tail. Xiao Yu often jumped in front of him, as he was certain he wouldn't mistake that sound for anyone else. Prince Ting looked over at the fish tank. The porcelain fish tank at Jingtai Hall wasn't as good as the crystal fish tank at his home residence, where he could see everything inside at a glance. But surprisingly, Xiao Yu, who should have been at the bottom of the tank, was instead lying on the edge with his back toward Prince Ting, so he could see his fishtail flicking back and forth. Thinking about how his fish had almost died, Prince Ting's mood darkened further. He walked over, but right when he was about to touch him, the fish panicked and dove into the water. Prince Ting blinked. He reached out again to touch the fish's back. Usually, Xiao Yu would circle his fingers with his tail, but now he only lifted his head and listlessly stared at him. Xiao Yu must have been scared, he thought. As he comforted his fish, Prince Ting kept thinking about where the young man could have gone. It was a small room, and just a quick glance around the room was enough to see everything in it. There was nowhere to hide. A thought suddenly came to Prince Ting as he recalled each place the young man had been seen. Why was it always his room? Only his aides and Ye Qinghuan had known that he was returning to Jingtai Hall today. Why did the youth run into him here at Jingtai Hall? Besides, with the way he was dressed, it would have been impossible for him to enter through the palace gates. Prince Ting stood up and accidentally stepped on the cloth on the ground with his cloud-patterned shoes. He picked up the cloth and moved it aside, revealing a puddle of water underneath it. The young man's feet had been wet, he recalled, thinking to look around for wet footprints in the room. Through careful observation, he found some that led to the wash basin and to the desk, and some that stayed near the door, but a path was formed where the ground was wettest. He followed along this path and finally saw a large black-haired dog. Ye Qinghuan's dog barked excitedly and wagged his tail at him. The wettest spot was right under where Xiong Feng was sitting. Prince Ting was a bit startled. He thought he was losing it. Xiong Feng was the one who made these tracks. Li Yu stared anxiously at Prince Ting until he left the room, feeling like he was about to break at any moment. He had no other choice. He was afraid Prince Ting would figure everything out since he had no way to get rid of the water on the ground, so he'd had to resort to using Xiong Feng as a scapegoat. "I'm sorry." The little carp apologized silently to his owner. "I didn't mean to hide it from you on purpose." A stony-faced Prince Ting walked out of the room. He'd taken the cloth on the ground. On the cloth, a few fish scales shone brightly. This wasn't the first time he found fish scales on the young man's clothes. And there was another detail he remembered. When he looked at the young man's ankle, he had also seen a silver light flash past. He had an idea what was happening now. Chapter 32. Becoming a Carp Spirit. Li Yu spent the entire day in the grip of anxiety. Now that the excitement was over and he'd gotten away without Prince Ting noticing anything, the little carp slept peacefully at the bottom of his tank. Xiong Feng, who had been extremely helpful, leaned against the tank in blissful sleep as well. Meanwhile, Prince Ting was pacing outside the room, and all of his weariness was blown away by the cool night breeze. He lined up all the times he met the young man and connected the dots. The fish scales that were on his clothes back then and the fish scales on the cloth now were undoubtedly both from Xiao Yu. If that was it, he probably would have assumed the young man had touched the fish. But how could the same fish scales appear on the youth's feet as well? The young man was dripping wet and was always dressed strangely. Prince Ting didn't hear any footsteps when he appeared, but instead heard a fish's tail. He could never discern where he came from or where he was hiding, and was never able to find him. But he always appeared by his side. None of the people he sent from the manor to look for the young man were able to find so much as a trace of him. When the young man escaped through the window, the guards who were lying in wait outside said they didn't see anything. When looking for the person who delivered the letter, the guards posted there told him that only the dog had left the room. None of the above could be simply explained by what he knew about the world. He thought he was quite clear-headed, but he suddenly had a crazy idea. Once the idea formed, it refused to leave, because it was the only way to explain everything. When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. "Tianchi, is your house haunted?" Ye Qinghuan had teased him about it before, and he ignored it. But now... Prince Ting swallowed. Ye Qinghuan might be partially right. The young man wasn't a human. As for what he was, the fish scales explained everything. The young man was probably Xiao Yu. Since the moon was already high in the sky, Wang Xi had already urged him to go to bed several times. With a complicated expression, Prince Ting glanced at the room where his fish was and waved him away. He had to think things through. He couldn't just hold a person or a fish under suspicion because of his own wild speculation. Ignoring how late it was, Prince Ting ordered Wang Xi to find servants from the imperial kitchen to bring him a couple of fish. Since Noble Consort Chu's cat had picked up Xiao Yu from the kitchen, Prince Ting specifically asked for the same type of fish. Wang Xi went off to complete his task, and the kitchen staff soon came over with a basket of fish, trembling because they didn't know what was going on. Prince Ting looked the fish over one by one. These fish looked almost identical to Xiao Yu, but their eyes were dull and lifeless. They didn't flap their tails or look up at him. Compared to Xiao Yu, they lacked the most important thing, spirit. Prince Ting sighed in relief. He should have realized that Xiao Yu was special long ago. Perhaps because he'd never had a pet before, he'd mistaken Xiao Yu's uniqueness as liveliness and intelligence. Even crows took care of their elderly, after all. He never thought it was anything out of the ordinary for his fish to be smart. No wonder he always thought the young man looked familiar. It was his own fish. And no wonder the young man always appeared in his room and entered the palace at the same time he did. Those were his own arrangements. Prince Ting became more and more certain of this truth, but he wasn't sure about what to do next. He had raised Xiao Yu for so long, and he'd truly grown to care for him. Now that he knew Xiao Yu wasn't a normal fish, Prince Ting pursed his lips. He was the one who saved Xiao Yu from the cat's paws. But Xiao Yu had helped him several times as well, including saving his relatives, the house of Changle. Prince Ting smiled wryly. Who could say who was indebted to whom in the end? How should he handle it? As dawn rose, Ye Qinghuan was finally able to appease his future father-in-law, King Jinjue, and rushed to the emperor to report to him. The emperor, however, was feeling irritated and didn't want to see Ye Shutze for too long, so he kicked him out after the requisite pleasantries had been exchanged. Ye Qinghuan was so tired that he decided to visit Prince Ting instead and begged for a bed to sleep in. With their relationship as it was, Prince Ting wouldn't just kick him out, right? But when he rushed into Jingtai Hall, instead of his normally composed, indifferent self, he found Prince Ting looking uncharacteristically worried. Ye Qinghuan observed him for a bit and decided to ask him about it, even though he didn't know what had happened. He'd always been quite worried for this older cousin of his. Tianshi, what's wrong? Prince Ting looked up slowly, glanced at him, and passed over the cloth he was holding. Ye Qinghuan accepted it, unsure, and weighed it in his hands. The cloth was a bit rough and felt damp. There were even a couple of fish scales on it. Ye Qinghuan giggled and said, Did you wrap your fish in cloth? Prince Ting paused. Ye Qinghuan had also thought of his fish. He turned and ordered Wang Xi to bring a brush and pen, then ordered everyone out of the room. Ye Qinghuan thought Prince Ting seemed more serious than usual, so he assumed there was a very important matter to attend to. He held his breath and waited. When he looked up, he saw Prince Ting concentrated for a bit, then raised his brush and wrote, Have you ever raised a Yao? Prince Ting thought that a fish who could turn into a human was probably not a ghost or a Yao fish. That is to say, Xiao Yu was most likely a fish spirit. Ye Qinghuan was dumbfounded. What kind of question was this? Ye Qinghuan, distressed, replied, I can barely handle my own dog, so how could I have raised something like that? He'd always thought Prince Ting didn't believe in ghosts and the like. Why did he suddenly start asking about them? This was so unlike the normal Prince Ting. Prince Ting stared at him, looking annoyed, as if he were saying, Of course I know you haven't raised one before. After a pause, though, what he wrote was, How does one raise a Yao? Ye Qinghuan was at the end of his rope. Why are you asking these questions? Do you want to raise one? Stop that and raise your fish properly. Don't mess with things like that, even if you're interested in them. Ye Shutze both feared and believed in ghosts and gods, including the Yao Prince Ting was asking about. Prince Ting kept asking. Why can't I touch them? Ye Qinghuan stuttered. It's a Yao! A Yao! You understand? Prince Ting had never met a Yao before, so he didn't quite understand. I figured you wouldn't. Seeing as no one was around, Ye Qinghuan leaned closer to Prince Ting and whispered, It's said that Yao are powerful and can confuse the heart. If you meet one, they will suck away your essence. It's written in many novels. Prince Ting considered this. He had never read a novel because he thought they were rather pointless, but listening to how Ye Shurtse was describing them now, perhaps he'd been too shallow. Ye Qinghuan said, If you want to know, I'll give you some another day. You can read the stories, but you can't dabble in Yao. Prince Ting frowned. Why not? Do Yao kill people? Ye Qinghuan thought carefully back to the stories he used to read. The Yao in these books all tricked scholars into marrying them, sucked away their essence until all that was left was a bag of bones, and were ultimately dealt with by passing monks and Taoist priests. Ye Qinghuan vaguely said, They probably wouldn't kill you, but they'll make you wish you were dead. Prince Ting was suddenly serious. If they weren't going to kill him, how would they make him wish he were dead? Ye Qinghuan was incredibly stressed. Why did he and Prince Ting have to talk about Yao? Was it a good thing to get involved with them? And why did Prince Ting actually seem interested? Prince Ting seriously wrote, How exactly do they suck away the essence? Ye Qinghuan stared at the note. He had just wanted a bed to sleep in. He had no answer to this, so he made the executive decision to kick himself out of Jingtai Hall instead. I'll bring some books for you tomorrow. Faced with Ye Shurtse's quick escape, Prince Ting was still left with many questions, and much that he wanted to know. It seemed that despite being the one who'd accidentally enlightened him, Ye Qinghuan could not explain. Wang Xi returned to ask him, Your Highness, should we return to the manor? The reason they'd come to the palace was to help the Duke of Chang'an's son out. Since Ye Shurtse was fine now, Wang Xi thought his master might want to return to his old residence. Prince Ting nodded. He had to return as quickly as possible. There were a lot of eyes in the palace, so it wasn't a good place to have a carp spirit. Wang Xi thus ordered servants to pack Prince Ting's things up, but there really wasn't much. The main thing was their little master fish, and this time, Ye Shurtse's Xiongfeng as well. Prince Ting ordered, Return Xiongfeng to Chang'an Manor. As for Xiao Yu, Wang Xi had already put the small carp into the crystal bottle and brought it to Prince Ting, just as Prince Ting preferred it. Li Yu was extremely happy. He had a great night's sleep and was feeling awake and refreshed. He thought he'd heard Ye Shurtse's voice that night. Did this mean the second prince's plot to frame Ye Qinghuan was successfully thwarted? He hadn't received a completion prompt from the system yet, but he couldn't think of anything else he had to do. Prince Ting hesitated for a moment, but didn't take the crystal bottle. Finding out that Xiao Yu was a carp spirit was one thing. Figuring out how to deal with him was another. It felt a little weird for him to tease his fish the way he used to, but the thought of abandoning his fish or sending him away... Prince Ting's expression cooled, and he took the crystal bottle from Wang Xi. He planned to observe Xiao Yu for a while after they returned to the manor. He'd been looking for the young man, who ended up being Xiao Yu, for a long time, but Xiao Yu had always tried to wipe away any clues that would lead to him. That meant Xiao Yu didn't want him to know his true identity. If Xiao Yu didn't want him to know, he would just observe and wait. He still didn't know why Xiao Yu had come to him or what he planned to do in the future. He could wait to show his cards until he figured those things out. But Ye Qinghuan said Yao would make him wish he were dead. Would Xiao Yu do that to him too? Prince Ting gazed at the little carp bobbing happily around his crystal bottle. Xiao Yu sometimes turned around and spat bubbles at him mischievously. In spite of himself, Prince Ting found himself smiling from the depths of his heart. Ye Qinghuan must have been exaggerating. He could tell that this fish wouldn't harm him. He wouldn't have so easily accepted the fact that Xiao Yu was a carp spirit otherwise. Li Yu spun around once inside the bottle and floated casually in the water. Ever since they started using the crystal bottle, he didn't have to worry about being stuck in one place, and he could even bask in the sun every now and then. Prince Ting always had a firm grasp on the crystal bottle, and when it swayed on occasion, it felt quite nice. Li Yu was drifting nicely with the motion of the water when a scale fell off him. At first, he thought his eyes were deceiving him, so he shook his head, but a scale had actually fallen off. He only realized recently that he'd been losing scales a lot over the past few days. Perhaps he'd used his brain too much, or he'd been shocked. He wasn't really a proper fish, so he didn't know why his scales were falling off. He'd whined about the idea of losing his scales before, but he hadn't been serious. Now they were actually falling off. He didn't feel anything when he lost them or anything, and it was fine if it just happened once or twice. But would he lose all his scales if this kept going on? If a person lost too much hair, they turned bald. Would a fish become a bald fish? But he wasn't even that old. Li Yu couldn't imagine what life would be like without his scales, and he didn't know if he could put them back on. He anxiously picked up a scale. There was a pudgy, tender sort of... Li Yu poked at the spot where the scale just fell off. It seemed like it was his flesh. Li Yu pressed the scale into his flesh, and the neighboring scale also fell off. Ah! Sob! Was he suffering from descaling? Walking alongside him, Wang Xi saw the fish picking up his scale and almost laughed out loud. Prince Ting glanced at him, and Wang Xi immediately turned away as if he hadn't seen anything. However, Prince Ting also saw the scales fall off his fish and thought back to the ones he saw on the cloth. It did seem pretty severe. Even though he was a carp spirit, it made him seem quite pitiful. Prince Ting frowned and gestured to Wang Xi. Have the imperial physician come by and take a look at Xiao Yu. Wang Gonggong felt like with this trip into the palace, His Highness had changed from simply liking his fish to liking his fish an unusual amount. Even the doctor he requested had gone from a mere servant to an imperial physician. Chapter 33. Fishy Suck. Wang Xi wasn't sure if the imperial physician could cure Master Fish Xiao Yu's illness, but he couldn't go against Prince Ting's orders. As expected of a man who cared for His Highness Prince Ting the most, Wang Gonggong asked around and summoned an imperial physician who also had a fish at home. That was probably good enough. Wang Gonggong brought the imperial physician to Prince Ting's residence. This imperial physician, who had the surname Xu, had dealt with many strange and mysterious diseases. So when he found out that Prince Ting had summoned him to look at his pet fish, he remained calm and unfazed. To make it easier for Imperial Physician Xu, Prince Ting placed his fish in a shallow, petal-shaped tea bowl so that he could be examined more easily. Just now, Li Yu's fishy instincts had taken over as he fluttered a few times in the tea bowl, and he'd lost 2 more scales. He didn't dare move around too much anymore and gazed pitifully at Imperial Physician Xu with wet eyes. This physician should be able to cure him and prevent him from turning into a bald fish, right? Without his gaze ever leaving the fish, Prince Ting coughed lightly and turned the teacup around, so Xiao Yu's face was pointed at him. He asked Imperial Physician Xu to look at the spine, and there were indeed some lost scales on Li Yu's spine as well. The imperial physician looked over the fish carefully, then examined the teacup before coming to a rough idea of what was going on. He stepped forward and said, Prince Ting, from what I know, most fish scales grow along with them, so they don't shed or change scales. There could only be 2 reasons for the scale loss, either some external reason or an illness. When the little carp heard illness, he trembled. Prince Ting knew his own fish well, so he immediately looked at Wang Xi, who said, If you need any medicine, please don't hesitate to let His Highness know. If we don't have it at the manor, then we'll find a way to get it. Wang Xi glanced at Prince Ting uncertainly, and Prince Ting nodded. So Wang Xi added, But you must not hurt Master Fish Xiao Yu. Imperial Physician Xu slightly smiled. I understand, but please allow me to be frank. Your Highness's fish seems very healthy, so it shouldn't be an illness. Perhaps he accidentally bumped into something when he was swimming. It should get better after a few days of rest. Ah, thought Li Yu. What a beautiful misunderstanding. Prince Ting put him in a tea bowl for the consultation, so Imperial Physician Xu thought he was normally kept in the tea bowl, and that bumps were inevitable since he only had a narrow space to swim in. The physician himself raised a group of koi at home who often bumped into each other when competing for food and lost scales that way, so he naturally thought Xiao Yu was losing scales for the same reason. But Li Yu himself wasn't sure that wasn't it. The fish tank Prince Jing prepared for him was definitely large enough for him to swim around in, and he rarely bumped into anything. If his scales were falling off because of the impact from his jumping, they would fall off from a specific area. But right now, it seemed that he was losing scales everywhere, no matter what he did, even if he just blew bubbles. Li Yu didn't really dare to move anymore. He was just thankful the scales didn't fall off in large patches, or his fish body would really be too ugly. So Imperial Physician Xu's suggestion probably wasn't the real reason for his scale loss. Li Yu was a little disappointed, but it wasn't bad news as long as he wasn't sick. He comforted himself. Perhaps a transmigrated fish body was different from a normal fish body. Even a dog as large as Xiong Feng would shed hair even though he was fine, so it was probably normal for him to lose fish scales, right? But would his tyrant master dislike him because of this? Probably not, right? He was just a black carp that was meant to be food. He got to where he was today not through his beauty, but through his cuteness. Would he not be cute anymore if he lost his scales? Li Yu spent so long trying to comfort himself that he ended up almost completely inside his own head. Prince Ting was influenced by the Imperial Physician's words that keeping a fish in a tank that was too small would cause it to lose its scales. Since Prince Ting knew that Xiao Yu was a carp spirit now, it didn't seem wrong to keep him in an ordinary fish tank. Once he'd sent Imperial Physician Xu away, Prince Ting came to an immediate decision. He gestured at Wang Xi to come closer. Since his orders were a little more complicated this time, Prince Ting wrote them out, and Wang Xi's eyebrows almost flew away from his face as he watched the brush move across the paper. After Prince Ting finished writing, Wang Xi knelt and said in a trembling voice, "Your Highness, was this okay?" Wang Xi had guessed that Prince Ting wanted to switch out the fish tank for Master Fish, but he never imagined it'd be that kind of fish tank. Prince Ting blew on the ink once he finished writing and signaled with his eyes. "Go on, hurry up." Wang Xi had been with Prince Ting for many years, so he knew that once his master made a decision, nothing could change his mind. Wang Gongong didn't bother saying anything else and scurried away to carry out his orders. Li Yu watched him leave in confusion. What had Prince Ting just done? After Prince Ting was finished with those arrangements, he habitually went to rub his poor fish's back, but he remembered at the last minute that Xiao Yu was losing scales. If he touched him, more scales might fall off. He had to listen to Imperial Physician Xu and take care of his fish, even more so because he was actually a carp spirit. Prince Ting, who'd decided without blinking to commission a new fish tank for Xiao Yu, now hesitated. That same fish he always touched was actually a boy. He couldn't bring himself to do it anymore. The little carp saw him reaching out with a finger and swam over and waited for Prince Ting to touch him. But Prince Ting stopped at the last moment. No way! Did Prince Ting not like him anymore? Li Yu wrapped his tail around Prince Ting's finger, seeking a sense of security. Prince Ting normally loved this kind of touch, but now he was starting to have wild thoughts. If this was the tail of the fish, what was it on the carp spirit? The fish head must be a person's face, so the tail should be his feet. A pair of delicate ankles flashed across Prince Ting's mind. For a moment, he just sat there. Then he stood up so abruptly that he startled the little carp, who swam aside and stared at him, confused. Prince Ting realized he was a little too worked up. Afraid that Xiao Yu would realize he was acting strange, he stuck out his finger as usual. Li Yu swam forward expectantly, but Prince Ting didn't touch his back or tail. Instead, he tapped his head gently. "This again?" thought Li Yu. "What exactly does it mean?" Though Prince Ting had ordered the production of a new fish tank to be carried out as fast as possible, it would still take a few days for it to be finished. So he had to put Xiao Yu back in the crystal fish tank for now. He gave him the best food during this time. For his part, Liu Yu was still losing his scales, and he no longer dared to move around too much. How was he going to finish his missions if he couldn't even move? He was very worried. Right when the little carp thought he was truly going to turn into bald fish, Tianting Palace issued several imperial decrees. The emperor took away all of the second prince's positions and gave him the title of the Marquis of An. The Marquis of An was not given another residence and was instead confined to the residence he was currently in. Noble consort Chu was demoted to concubine, and as her house arrest from last time had not yet ended, it was set to continue. The emperor issued both punishments and rewards. The house of Chang'an was promoted to a higher class, and Ye Qinghuan himself was promoted to a higher title as well. The emperor allowed the house of Chang'an and King Jinjue to choose the date for the wedding themselves and built a residence for the princess of Jinjue in the imperial city. The changes he made showed that the emperor was quite determined. The emperor had been thinking about how to punish the second prince for trying to frame Ye Qinghuan. When noble consort Chu of Zhongshui Palace had heard the news, she knelt in front of Tianting Palace and wouldn't get up. In the end, the servants had to carry her back. The emperor refused to see her and instead went to Changchun Palace alone, where he remained seated in front of Empress Xiao Hui's memorial tablet for the entire night. The female corpse in Yanyu Pavilion turned out to be a death row prisoner from Heavenly Prison who had passed away from illness several days ago. The emperor knew that Ye Shutze had plotted against the second prince, but Ye Qinghuan had clearly been acting out of self-defense. In the end, the second prince had been the one who started it, and the one who acted like an idiot. If he had succeeded, how would he have explained it to King Jinjue? Had the second prince never considered the bigger picture, or did he think the big picture could be sacrificed for the sake of his own goals? The emperor didn't mind if his sons used a few underhanded measures here and there, but the second prince had taken it too far. Just because of his future crown prince status, he'd impulsively lashed out at anyone he felt like. Even if he did ascend to the throne in the future, there was no way he would be able to command the people's respect. The candidate he had previously favored was clearly not suited for the throne. The favor he'd showed the second prince had gone not only to noble consort Chu's head, but the second prince's as well. If he was unable to handle a little attention now, what would happen in the future? Luckily, the emperor had told very few people about this possible choice and hadn't officially announced the second prince's candidacy for the crown prince position. As things currently stood, calamity had been averted, which meant this was the best outcome. If the second prince did not receive the punishment he deserved, however, it would forever disappoint the house of Chang'an, Prince Xing, and most of all, Empress Xiao Hui. After the emperor collected his thoughts, he issued another decree. Nobody was allowed to voice their opinion on this matter. These decrees nearly caused the court and back palace to explode. There was an unwritten rule in this dynasty that if a prince was given a title early, he had no chance at the throne. Prince Ting was an example. Everyone knew that the emperor had given Prince Ting his title to appease him as his Disan, but the second prince's situation was different. The second prince was not given the title of prince, but of marquis, and the emperor had decreed it in a hurry without discussing it with the Ministry of Rights. It was obvious that the second prince had completely lost favor. When she received the decree, the noble consort Chu, the current concubine Chu, fainted on the spot. Hope started to blaze in the other concubines who had sons, especially the third prince's mother, concubine Qian. If the second prince wasn't a viable option, then the next in line would naturally be her son, the third prince. Of the court counselors who had previously supported the second prince, believing that their high position and great wealth was guaranteed, not many would continue to help him. Most had begun making other plans. In comparison to the palace, where some were happy and some were worried, Chang'an Manor outside the palace was covered with festive decorations, auspicious and peaceful. Ye Qinghuan and the Princess of Jinjue had already exchanged their gengtie, and the Duke of Chang'an and King Jinjue were choosing a date for them already. As for Prince Jing, though he wasn't mentioned in the imperial decree, he was also rewarded. The emperor ordered head eunuch Luo to bring a set of suet jade boxes for Prince Jing to put fish food in. The emperor had seen the bamboo box Prince Jing was using at the imperial banquet and felt a bit sorry for him. The emperor had rewarded Prince Jing, but Li Yu was happiest of all. The new fish food boxes were engraved with a fish design, and the emperor seemed to have had them made especially for him. He'd heard that suet jade was extremely valuable, so using it to make fish food boxes made Li Yu feel like his worth had doubled. As soon as the imperial decree was issued, there was something else he could be happy about too. The Impenetrable Defense side quest was updated. The emperor's edicts laid out both punishments and rewards, and Li Yu realized that the side quest could only be considered complete once good was rewarded and evil was punished. His scales falling off was one matter, but he still had to collect his mission rewards, so Li Yu entered the system. He'd never been too invested in the rewards for the side mission, but after patiently listening to the fish scamming system introduce the rewards one by one, Li Yu's jaw nearly fell to the ground. The reward for the Impenetrable Defense side quest was a completely new type of fish scales. There were 5 colors to choose from: gold, red, green, silver, and purple. Had he been losing scales recently because the mission would reward him with new ones? You're overthinking, user. The system informed him immediately. Your scales keep falling off because normal fish scales can no longer handle the intensity of your behavior. Oh. Since the fish scamming system wasn't trying to hide anything, Li Yu had to believe he really had messed around too much and his scales couldn't stand it anymore. But I haven't really been moving around that vigorously, Li Yu thought, without any self-awareness, forgetting that he was constantly jumping up and down across Prince Jing's room. The system informed him that the strength of his new fish scales would be better, and once they'd been replaced, they would not fall off. Li Yu was extremely happy to collect this reward, but his new scales were so different from his original scales. Only koi had flashy colors like that. If he had them, did that mean he could actually become a koi fish? He was just a little curious. He definitely wanted to turn into a human at the end. The system only said, "There's no need to worry, user." Li Yu became more alert. Usually, when the system told him not to worry, he was about to get scammed. He was used to it by now, but he was afraid that his tyrant master, who'd been a little colder to him recently, would suddenly grow suspicious of him. But since his original scales kept falling off, he might as well use the new ones that had just arrived at his doorstep. User, please choose a color and confirm your reward. Such bright colors. They're all about the same anyway, right? Against his conscience, Li Yu picked the color closest to that of a koi. Gold. The system forced him out after he confirmed his selection. How rude! After returning to reality, Li Yu glanced at his body, but his scales were still as gray as before. Did the reward not take effect yet? When he raised his tail, a row of scales fell right off. Li Yu was incredibly embarrassed. Since they're falling off like this, will my tail be bald first? He glanced at his tail and suddenly froze. There was a touch of gold peeking out of his originally gray-black fishtail. Wang Xi brought some people over to change the water for Li Yu. He was chasing his tail in circles when he heard Wang Gongong gasp. Your Highness! Your Highness, look! Wang Gongong cried out in surprise. Prince Jing rushed over at once. Li Yu, with his gray-black tail and its gleam of gold, swam around pretentiously. Your Highness, this servant has only seen koi with this shade of gold before. Wang Xi had always thought that Master Fish was smart, definitely not an ordinary fish. But could it be that he was actually a koi carp? Even though his body wasn't really shaped like one? Prince Jing himself had never seen such a thing before either. When he took a closer look at Xiao Yu's tail, he saw that there were new fish scales growing from where the old ones had fallen off. And some of those new fish scales were golden. Prince Sing had already determined that Xiao Yu was a carp spirit. Since he could turn into a human, turning into a koi was nothing. After all, koi were a kind of fish. Prince Sing immediately accepted this new development and calmly ordered Wang Xi to take meticulous care of Xiao Yu. Li Yu was surprised and happy to see that Prince Sing didn't seem to suspect anything. Was this what the system meant when it told him not to worry? It was rare for the fish scamming system to do anything good. With that, his new scales started to come in to replace the old. Imperial physician Xu had said most fish didn't shed scales, but it wasn't an absolute statement, so Xiao Yu could just be a type of fish that did shed. When he saw other scales falling off, Li Yu's entire mentality changed. They were probably falling because he was doing away with the old fish scales to make space for the new ones. He was excited to see what he would look like after all his new fish scales came in. A day later, he had a whole new look. His overall body was still black, but there were many golden scales on his stomach and his tail. The system must have elected to just add to his original body color, he thought. Though it wasn't the whole body gold refurbishing Li Yu had imagined, the black gold coloring still looked quite distinguished. In any case, when the main quest, Tyrant's Priceless Pet Fish, was complete, there was a side quest called Turn into a Koi, still waiting for him. Perhaps he'd still be able to change when that came around. The little carp, who was trying his hardest to turn into a koi, hid in the leaf blanket and giggled to himself. He practically had a makeover. Since Prince Sing accepted it, the servants didn't gossip about it amongst themselves, and Li Yu was even less worried about the rest of the people in Prince Sing's residence. He was only growing golden scales on inconspicuous parts of his body, like his tail and stomach, and most people didn't have the chance to approach his tank, so they may not have even seen his original appearance. What he didn't know was that when Prince Sing saw his new coloring, in order to prevent gossip, he ordered Wang Xi to make everyone in the residence recount the same story, that Xiao Yu was descended from koi. He managed to cover up the whole situation for Xiao Yu impeccably. Now that he completed the side quest, Li Yu started thinking about his main quest again. After his scales stopped changing, he didn't lose any more, but his tyrant master still treated him a little coldly. He wasn't keeping his distance. Li Yu could sense that his master still loved to spoil him. He would pat his head, watch him swim around, and often just silently gazed at him. But he wouldn't rub him anymore like he did in the past, even though Li Yu looked so much more distinguished now. Did a distinguished fish not deserve to be rubbed? Yesterday, some books had been sent over from Chang'an Manor for some reason. Prince Sing seemed to be extremely interested in these books, immersing himself in them while he was in the room, and rubbed Li Yu even less. If Prince Sing didn't rub him, how was a fish to finish his missions? The little carp jumped out of his crystal fish tank. Ever since his scales had been replaced, he found that he could use his tail more smoothly. He jumped a few times, landing in the petal-shaped tea bowl on Prince Sing's desk and splashing a couple drops of water onto the books that were spread out there. He didn't mean to. Li Yu only just remembered that when Prince Sing read books with him, Wang Gonggong would first put an absorbent towel on the table and Prince Sing would keep the tea bowl away from the book. But this time, since the fish had jumped out on his own, no protective measures had been put in place and he accidentally got Prince Sing's book wet. Li Yu was agonizing over how he was going to salvage the situation when Prince Sing took out a dry towel and quickly wiped the water droplets on the book. His dark eyes glanced at the little carp flapping around in the teacup. Li Yu immediately stopped moving, but the prince didn't chase him away. Prince Sing thought that Xiao Yu might want to read the book with him. Moving the tea bowl closer would be too obvious, so instead he imperceptibly moved the book toward the fish. The little carp carefully raised his head. Prince Sing was so concentrated. What kind of book was he reading? His tyrant master usually liked reading books on the art of war or travel books. Last time, he had fallen asleep while reading a book on the art of war. The little carp glanced at the black title written clearly on the white cover. This time, the book was The Tale of the White Snake. Li Yu recalled that his original world had the legend of the white snake. So what was the tale of the white snake? Li Yu started reading the book, curious. The general premise seemed to be that a white snake spirit fell in love with a passing scholar and transformed into a human so she could marry him. Li Yu guessed that this was a folktale. When he started reading, the white snake and the scholar had already exchanged wedding vows. The white snake was confessing her true identity as a snake spirit, and she softly said to the scholar, "Husband, us Yao all need to absorb essence." Li Yu was perplexed. It was difficult for him to read ancient books, but Prince Jing could read 10 lines at a glance. Before Li Yu could read how the snake absorbed essence, Prince Jing had already hurriedly turned the page. On the second night, the white snake spirit once again said gently, "Beloved, us Yao need to absorb essence today as well." Prince Jing flipped the page quickly again. He flipped through over 10 pages like this. Li Yu estimated that the white snake spirit had probably absorbed the scholar's essence at least 10 times already, but he'd still read absolutely nothing. In the end, with one more page in the book, a great monk came and denounced the white snake for disobeying the way of heaven. He placed the white snake in a golden alms bowl, and the scholar came to his senses to become a monk alongside this passing monk. Huh? This is quite similar to the legend of the white snake, Li Yu thought. But why was there so much stuff about absorbing essence and pear cultivation instead of the other plot lines? Prince Jing closed the book. For some reason, Li Yu felt like his tyrant master's ears had turned a bit red. Perhaps Prince Jing didn't like the ending of this book, because he immediately started another one. Li Yu glanced at the title. It was called The Legend of the Fox Spirit. It was probably about a fox spirit who fell in love with a scholar and asked to pear cultivate when she went to his room in the middle of the night. The fox spirit was more powerful than the white snake spirit. The first night alone was a full 20 pages. Li Yu secretly counted as Prince Jing flipped the page 20 times. He only realized afterward what kind of book it was. It must be an ancient story about lovemaking. Li Yu was incredibly amused to learn that Prince Jing actually read that kind of thing. No wonder he flipped the pages so quickly. Was his tyrant master shy? But it wasn't a huge deal to read this stuff. When Li Yu was still a human, he had just turned 18. Who hadn't read a bit of porn at that age? Prince Jing was a young man in his 20s, so in ancient times, he should have had a courtyard full of children running around by now. What was wrong with seeing a bit of action in a book? Li Yu tried to get closer. "Master, I also want to see the indescribable things happening between a Yao and a scholar." Prince Jing had just closed the second book when he saw his carp spirit reaching his head out, trying to get closer. Prince Jing couldn't help but smile and flicked his fish's head lightly. The little carp fell back into the teacup with a splash. Night had fallen. Li Yu wanted to secretly complete his main mission on this dark and windy night. The main mission, Tyrant's priceless pet fish, was almost complete. All he had to do was rub his fish lips against Prince Jing's. He had put it off recently because he was either trying to save people or losing his fish scales, but now it was time to finish up the main quest. Li Yu waited quietly in his crystal fish tank for Prince Jing to fall asleep. He waited a long time after there was no more movement from the sleeping prince, and then he jumped out of the fish tank toward Prince Jing's bed. He was already quite familiar with this route. He arrived at Prince Jing's pillow without a problem. He remembered that Prince Jing didn't blame him for getting his book wet during the day, so he was for some reason equally confident that Prince Jing wouldn't blame him if he got the pillow wet this time. The little carp jumped onto the jade pillow, aimed at Prince Jing's face, and stuck his fishy lips out. He would never do this in human form because it was too shameless, but he could afford to be shameless when he was a fish. Prince Jing was a little sleepy at first, but after he realized that Xiao Yu was a carp spirit, and especially after he started losing his scales, it was hard for him to not pay attention to the fish in the tank at night, aware of all his movements. He'd gotten into the habit of getting up to take a look at the fish after it fell asleep, and even though the scale loss issue had been resolved, this habit hadn't changed yet. When the little carp jumped onto the bed, Prince Sing was just about to fall asleep, but he suddenly heard a few flaps of a tail quite clearly. Prince Sing was wide awake at once, and he continued to listen. What was Xiao Yu going to do? Would he turn into a human? The sound of the fishtail was getting closer and closer, and Prince Sing was certain that Xiao Yu was coming toward his bed. When the fish jumped onto his jade pillow, a tiny droplet of water landed on Prince Sing's face, but, in his excitement, the little carp failed to notice. Prince Sing didn't move either. He'd been observing the carp spirit in secret for the past couple of days, but he hadn't learned anything yet. If he woke up right now, Xiao Yu would definitely be embarrassed. If he continued to pretend to sleep, he might be able to figure out the fish's goal. He could feel that the other party, surrounded by an aura of water, was getting close. Mwah! Something sharp touched his lips for just a moment. Prince Sing's breath caught in his throat as he realized what it was. The lively, sweet scenes from the books he'd read about Yao and scholars, especially the parts he'd flipped through quickly, popped into his mind one after another. The white snake spirit and the scholar, the fox spirit and the scholar, all became this vexing carp spirit and himself. It wasn't hot in the room, but Prince Sing was covered with a thin layer of sweat. His body was stiff and his chest was burning. He didn't know what he was doing, lying here half helpless and half expectant, waiting for the carp spirit to go further. But instead, the carp spirit blithely turned around and jumped back to his fish tank. What? Was it so easy for the carp spirit to suck essence that he was over already? You guys, we have reached the end of these last few chapters, and well, sorry. Let's just go through my notes, okay? So, the first thing that I am going to say is that, and I'm not going to work backwards this time, I'm actually going to work from chapters 29 to 33. The first thing I want to say is that I thought it was very smart of Ye Qinghuan and Prince Sing to still keep an eye on the sixth prince, even though they felt like he really wasn't part of anything nefarious with the second prince. Because, yeah, it's better to be safe than sorry. So go ahead and keep guard, especially since this kind of thing is common in the imperial palace, between multiple brothers or multiple princes who are vying for the throne, blah, blah, snore. So smart on them. The next thing I'll say is that I thought it was so sweet and considerate that Prince Sing actually remembered Li Yu's terror when he killed that woman in his room and how Li Yu had responded. And so he didn't want to bring his pet fish along because he didn't want him to have to possibly see anything like that again. And then the other thing that I had thought of, and I was glad to see I was right, well, I don't know about glad, but it keeps the plot going, is when they had said that the second prince had prepared poison for some reason, my brain immediately thought, oh my god, it's for Li Yu. He's gonna try to kill the fish with this, right? And lo and behold, that was the freaking plan. Like, second prince, it's a fish. A fish. Get over yourself, my guy. Whatever. And the other thing I'll say is, at first, when the king was just going to basically let the second prince's actions slide because he needed to restrain himself, I was like, no, sir. You kick the second prince. Give him his just punishment. Because if you don't, not to say he won't do things even after punishment, but if you don't check him now, he's going to keep doing these things, and they may even get worse and put people in danger. The people you're supposed to care about, Prince Sing, and now his fish, and Ye Qinghuan, and the princess of Jinjue. Come on, my guy, be smart. But it was nice to know in the end, because of Prince Sing and what he did, that he actually gave the second prince a punishment, and I'm glad his mother received it as well, because it's clear that he got his little scheming tricks from his mother. So let's see. Yes. When Prince Ding got the lime powder in his eyes and Li Yu was freaking out on what to do, I just knew that he was going to turn into a human. And I was so freaking excited. If you couldn't tell, by the way, I went into chapter 31 because I was like, finally, there's more interaction between the two of them. And I mean, but he turned back into a fish. And I'm just like, turn back into a human longer, please. But it's still so good. So good. I'm happy he got his reward, though, for completing his mission and getting new scales. It's pretty cool. It's just crazy that he had to start losing some before he got them. Now, the next thing I am about to say is actually not something good. Is it something terrible? No, it's not. But I'm sharing my thoughts, so that's how we're going to do it. I am loving this book so far, this series, but the one thing that I have to say about it that I do not like, that I've noticed specifically in these past couple of chapters, is the repetition of how the sentences are started. Now, I know to some people, you might think I'm making a big deal out of nothing, and I'm not making a big deal. I'm just expressing my thoughts, okay? I'm going to keep reading, but let's go back to page 348 when it's from the Emperor and it's like, as for Prince Ding, though he wasn't mentioned, blah, 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 he received the reward. The Emperor ordered head eunuch to blah, 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 blah. The Emperor had seen the bamboo box, blah, 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 blah. The Emperor had rewarded Prince Ding, blah, 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 blah. And the Emperor seemed to have blah, 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 blah. So the one thing I learned over my years of writing is that one thing you definitely do not want to do in writing an essay and writing a book or anything, unless it's very intentional and clearly for a specific reason that you must do so, is to not start multiple sentences the same way. And when that was happening, my brain just noticed it when it happened. It wasn't like I was looking for something wrong in the book, but it was so annoying. And then it even happened, I noticed a little later with Li Yu, where it kept saying Li Yu, blah, 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 Li Yu, blah, 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 Li Yu, blah, 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 blah. And it was just kind of like, like that just made my brain twitch in a way that I did not like. Nevertheless, like I said, I am still thoroughly enjoying this series. And guess what, you guys? The next video concludes the first book. So I hope you guys enjoyed this reading so far. Please leave some comments so I can interact with you guys. And I'll see you later. 我爱你们.